So when we say new culture, it's really a mixture of economic activities, business activities, and some are not business activities, and mix them together with the creation of places, beautiful places, so that actually people come together. When people come together, they create new culture. That's what really Xintiandi is about. Well, the Xintiandi development is now over 20 years old. So when we thought about the development in 1996, 97, our idea was to create a community for the international community, because we thought at that time Shanghai would be a international economic center, which now, of course, is proven true. So we thought it would be good to have to create that kind of atmosphere and functions so that everyone will be very comfortable, whether they are from Europe or USA or from China or from Asia. So as we built in the last 20 years, we followed this idea. We still follow this idea. Now, of course, Shanghai has changed tremendously. Personally, I thought the reason for its success is that, first of all, we talk about it's really the right time and the right place. Because every development has a time and place. And the place, we thought, the time was when Shanghai and other parts of China, there were a lot of beautiful old buildings being demolished wholesale. So there were some sounds or noises that, hey, you know, is there another way to do this? And our whole development is really an urban regeneration project, because at the heart of the old part of the city, actually. So what we have done is really shown to Shanghai and China that actually older buildings or traditional buildings have value and doesn't need to be all torn down. That's one part. The other part is actually we have successfully created a new way of living, a new lifestyle. For example, at that time, nobody can actually sit outside, have a cup of coffee, and look at each other. With that, now we're able to do that and then, you know, have the atmosphere that actually Shanghai doesn't have. So I think we helped create a kind of new culture for Shanghai. That's probably why, and up to today, we still continue to create this kind of new culture as we develop other parts of Xintiandi area, and also continue to regenerate and make our development even better and better.
Traditional buildings, they're very beautiful, and also made this city very charming. So do you think what is the most fascinating part of a city in your mind?
Well, if you really think, or as I thought about how these beautiful cities, they're always made up of different communities. And as a city as a whole, city usually is a big place. A city, to me, is most fascinating when they have different kinds of communities and not just one kind of community. So whether you think, so this older part and the newer part, the taller part and the shorter part, and then the functions also quite different. So when there is a diversity of these kinds of communities, and then some of them are actually quite beautiful and fascinating. So as they made it up, then the whole city becomes fantastic. So that's usually how I see city, if you look at beautiful cities, right, in the world.
圆圆，新娘子好看吗？不过等到你结婚的时候啊，可能这些老房子都不在了，你呀就不能在这里出嫁喽。
Department of Cultural Relics protection, well, they might say that it is not that good to reconstruct a building because it might maybe ruin this building. What do you think about it?
First of all, Xintiandi is not, when we regenerate the Xintiandi area, they are not listed buildings. They are older, normal buildings. So it's an adaptive reuse project. In each city, there are buildings that needs to be preserved. But the building that's preserved is a shell because the function usually is no longer there. So how actually you made the community become even more attractive is incorporating the old and also something new together so that the whole area, the whole neighborhood becomes fascinating. So there's an old and new together. I think there's some ways to preserve is to put like an old building and it becomes preserved and it's like on a podium. And it's like this, and then maybe they put grass surrounding it and all that. It actually is not interesting because you look at it, actually it's a shell. The function is not there, right? So preservation is good, it's necessary. But in the end, cities regenerate itself and it becomes fascinating as old and new come together, and then the uses is always new because we always use it in the present way, right? We don't use it in the past way. The past way is past. So with the function, and in the future, we may reuse it differently. And we will create new culture. I mean, for example, in Europe, most of the old buildings can be reused in different ways. Unless there's some very specific building that actually have such historical significance that they have to preserve. Some like a museum and some just like that. But these are not the majority. The majority is actually older and new buildings coming together. And now that, for example, Shanghai is entering a next phase of development, now that Shanghai and China talk about quality of development. Before they talk about how fast you can develop, but now more and more about quality. So quality is different from actually, it gives details and sophistication to develop. Meaning, to me, is what I just talked about, creating different communities and with old and new come together, but with the latest use, the most appropriate use, most fascinating use for that part of the town that makes it fascinating.
We know that China is developing at full speed during the past 30 years with an unbrokenly renewed urban planning. But do you think the urban planning of China has been changed compared to maybe decades ago?
Right. When I first came here to work on Xintiandi more than 20 years ago, Shanghai and China, they were developing with the goal to develop quickly because China wanted to catch up at the time. So Shanghai, as well as other cities, do that very successfully. So now a lot of leaders in Shanghai and other cities start to question, okay, now how to make Shanghai to go one step upward. It's not just about more and more buildings. It's how actually these buildings and community come together and make it a place even better. So that means to talk about the quality. So the quality, when you talk about quality, that means you have to reflect on actually in more detail for each of the places. Because before, to make speed, they might decide to, for example, demolish a lot of old buildings. Or they may decide to just build on the new part of the land because it's easier to build, rather than regenerating old part of town. But as you see from more sophisticated cities, they usually, the interesting part of town is with the old and the new together, not just all new. So urban regeneration becomes very important for Shanghai and China. And with that, I think there's a lot of opportunity now to talk about quality of development and quality of community. And we talk about the way that we did Xintiandi now has even more significance because in some way we did it 20 years ago.
How will you evaluate the relationship between culture and architecture, which is your part?
Architecture is part of culture, and culture renews itself. A building is a shell, right? Most buildings are shell, actually, of culture. As people inhabit and make things out of it and play and learn, then they create culture. So it's a living thing. That's why I just said, if you have a building stand alone without activities, it could be a beautiful shell. But most buildings and areas are not like that. It needs to continue to create new culture. And that's why reusing of the buildings can help create those new culture. So when we say new culture, it's really a mixture of economic activities, business activities, and some are not business activities, and mix them together with the creation of places, beautiful places, so that actually people come together. When people come together, they create new culture. That's what really Xintiandi is about.
Someone said Xintiandi is the best project of sharing land. Do you agree with that?
The best projects are always the next one.
Yes, so can we expect a better one in the future?
Of course, with Xintiandi, we achieve a kind of a landmark status. But as a company, at least for planning and design, we always push the envelope. Now we look at how people use the buildings are completely different from before. I mean, look at the co-working. I mean, we would not imagine co-working even several years ago, how Chinese young people use, how they work on the building, in the building is completely different. And that's what we have to change. So with the change comes new kind of development. So the best development is always the next one.